What is going on, all you Pokemon collecting maniacs out there? This is Ryan, the PikaPikaPapa, and we're going to do today what I absolutely love doing. We're going to look at the way some cards have performed in the past to give us some idea of what might happen in the present, or even what could possibly happen in the future. Now, we all know that it's a fool's errand to try and do this exercise, right? Nobody knows where the highs are, nobody knows where the lows are, and to be honest with you, the market is going to do what it wants to do anyways. However, it is really cool to be able to try and draw some comparisons, and it is really fun to do exercises like this, especially when the market is super frothy the way it is right now, right? We have Sword and Shield alt arts that are at all-time highs. I mean, some of them are starting to come back down a little bit, but we see prices for these that we have just never seen before. So sometimes when a market is acting like this, it's really good for me as a collector, as an investor, to kind of ground myself and say, okay, have there ever been patterns like this in the past that I can take some lessons from? And believe it or not, I don't know if everybody remembers this, but towards the middle of 2023, we saw a lot of these awesome Sun and Moon cards absolutely take off like a scalded rabbit. Like, they shot up through the freaking roof, and you're going to see that here in just a minute. But then after they shot up through the roof, they started to come down a little bit. They started to normalize. So in this video, we're going to be looking at those cards. We're going to be looking at their price before the pop. We're going to be looking at their price after the pop, and we're going to be talking about how high is high and how high some of these cards got in the middle of the frenzy. And it's going to be a really cool exercise, and I think there's a lot of lessons and learnings that we'll take away from this. Now, the other thing I want to say is I'm going to talk a lot about PSA 10 populations, like we're going to be looking at PSA 10 prices. And those populations, I think, is something to call out before we even get into this, because the PSA 10 population for all of these Sun and Moon cards are absolutely paltry compared to what you see in the Sword and Shield space. Now, that does not mean that Sword and Shield cards aren't investable, aren't collectible, and don't have a very bright future in front of them. But what it does mean is that, listen, the Sword and Shield era needs some specialness to it, which it has. It needs to have this awesome aura around it, so that 10, 15 years from now, if some of these cards have 10,000, 15,000 PSA 10s in existence, that people still want them. And let me talk about some of the things that I think happened in the Sword and Shield block, which gives it that ability, right? Like, we had it went through the pandemic. You cannot discount that. Like, that brought a ton of people back into the hobby, and there are all kinds of memories associated with that. We have trainer galleries. We have some amazing alt arts. Like, there's just so many cool things about the Sword and Shield era. And I'm telling you right now, not just the Sword and Shield era, but I feel like the Pokemon market as a whole has a ton of momentum at this point in time. So I think there are all kinds of things which will allow these cards, you know, to kind of push through the amount of supply that they have. Because remember, the PSA 10 population is one thing, but the demand is the most important part in the world. Why do you think those Umbreons, those Moonbreons are still going for $1,400, $1,500 in a PSA 10 holder? Well, that's because the demand is still through the roof. The market doesn't care that there's almost 13,000 of them. So one of the things that I want to call out is that, and I think that we're going to be able to do a whole lot of research, and I think that we're going to walk away with a lot of really cool learnings. And I'm telling you, there's actually some patterns here. There's no way to say that, you know, the Sword and Shield is going to follow the exact same pattern, but it is really interesting to see these awesome cards from Sun and Moon and the patterns that they followed. So if that kind of stuff gets you excited, if you like digging into the why and not just talking about the what, then this channel might be for you. So if you haven't hit the subscribe button yet, hit that subscribe button. If you like what you see, give us a thumbs up. And if you have questions or comments, drop them down below. I'm going to tell you right now, though, me and my family are going to be floating in the ocean somewhere. We're going on vacation, so it'll take me a while to get back to your comments, but I promise you I will. With that out of the way, let's start looking at some of these really awesome cards from the Sun and Moon era. And you know I've got to start with Gengar, because Gengar is absolutely my dog. I love Gengar. And this Gengar happens to come from the Team Up set, which is obviously the biggest and baddest set from the Sun and Moon era. So this card right here has a population sub 500, so not a very big population. And when you look at this card prior to the jump, it was still $450 in a PSA 10 holder. Now, when I think about that, honestly, and I try and like kind of make all of these things make sense, I'm like, man, that's still pretty low. Gengar is a wildly popular Pokemon. Team Up, it was obviously, even back then, everybody knew that was the big set from the Sun and Moon era. So that really wasn't a ton of money for a card which has a population that low. And then when the pop hit, this thing went absolutely nuts. It went all the way up to $1,500. There were multiple sales in the $1,500 range, and I want to call this out early because you don't see a lot of graphs like this. This one shot up overnight. It was almost like it just suddenly somebody realized, or a group of some people realized, hey, this card is amazing. It's from Team Up, like super low population. I got to get this. And they were spending $1,500 left and right to pick this one up. Now, almost as quickly as it went up, it came back down. It did not take long for this thing to come back down, into a little bit of a normal range. However, when you think about it, now the price is $740. Pre-jump, it was $450. It has still held on to a ton of those gains. Like if you had this card before the insanity and you still have it today, guess what? You are up 64%, right? $450 pre-jump, $740 now. That's a 64% gain. However, if you had bought this card in the middle of the insanity, if you bought it at the $1,500 mark, well, you're down 50%. That's a significant loss right there. And I'm not saying this card won't recover in time, but whenever you talk about losses, and I'm going to go into detail here on the very last slide of this video, whenever you talk about losses, like this is why I always say protect the downside. It is really, really hard to claw your way out of a 50% loss. But I'll tell you right now, if you had this beforehand, or as you see, it came down and it kind of flatlined for a while, and now it's starting to work its way back up again. So really cool lesson from this Gengar and Mimikyu card. I absolutely love it. Team Up is obviously a beast, so really interesting to see this one and how it performed. The next card right here, sticking with Team Up, is this Magikarp, and I love the artwork on this. Poor Magikarp has no idea what's going on. He's getting shot up through the air, and he's like, what the heck are you doing, Whale Lord? So I don't know why I love this card so much. I just think it's really cute, but population in a PSA 10 holder is right at 300 with 301 of them. Now, prior to the jump, this was at 318 bucks. So again, I mean, 318 bucks is a ton of money. It's nothing to shake a fist at. But when you think about it, came from the Team Up set and it's got this awesome art on it, maybe that's not a ton of money. Now, it peaked at right around $1,000. And again, as I said, unlike the Gengar card, which shot up overnight, this one slowly worked its way up. So this might be a better comparison to what we've seen in the alt art space. But again, at the peak, this was at $1,000. Now today, you can pick it up for 520 bucks. Again, serious jump from that $318 pre-jump right there, right? From $318 to $520. I mean, you were talking about a 64% jump from pre till now. However, as we saw earlier, if you were to buy right at the peak, right at the peak of frothiness when everything's going nuts, you would still be down 48%. And again, a cool call out on this graph right here is you'll see it peaked and it valleyed, and again, it's starting to slowly work its way back up. So really, really exciting stuff to see these two awesome cards from these two amazing sets and how they performed. The next one we're going to look at right here is this one from Cosmic Eclipse, the Arceus, the Dialga, and the Palkia. And I'm going to tell you right now, you're not going to see any trainer cards on this list, even though Sun and Moon is filled with epic trainers that are super high value. I just don't think that's a fair comparison to the Sword and Shield alt art, so I pulled all of them out. So Cosmic Eclipse is an $850 booster box, and this card right here is a sub 500 population in PSA 10. Now, before the jump, this was at $395. Now, it peaked at right about $850, but again, worked its way down really, really slowly, really methodically, but also in a decent amount of time. I mean, we're talking about maybe a 4 or 5 month decline right there. And now you can get it for $500. So when you think about it, pre-jump, it was about 400 bucks, and now post-jump, it's about 500 bucks. It didn't hold on to quite the amount of gains as the other ones did. Now, I don't think it's as big of a name as Gengar is, and I don't think the artwork is as cool as the Magikarp. And obviously, Cosmic Eclipse and Team Up, you can't compare the two, right? When I think of Cosmic Eclipse, that's probably in like the Lost Origin, Fusion Strike, it's kind of in that era of the Sword and Shield block. And then when you think of Team Up, obviously I compare Team Up to Evolving Skies, even though it's really hard to compare the two, but those are kind of how I draw comparisons here. Now, if you had bought this at the peak, again, down 42%, so still in that 50% drop from peak to where it is right now. But again, another one where you see it did start to flatten out for a while, and now it's starting to get a little bit of gains in there. So this will be something for us to keep an eye on as we continue to move forward. The next card we're going to look at right here is the Gardevoir and Sylveon from Unbroken Bonds, another one, super low population, 301 PSA 10s in the world. This was a $200 card before things started to get a little bit crazy, right? Then it jumped all the way up to 900 bucks, and now it's 375. It has been able to hold on to a lot of the gains from 900 to 375. That's a big drop, but if you think about it, still from 200 to 375, I mean, that's almost 88% gain. That is absolutely awesome. I love this card. I love Unbroken Bonds. You know that Unbroken Bonds and Unified Minds are like two of my favorite sets from the Sun and Moon era. And I like this card. I like the fact that Sylveon's on there. I think there's a lot of momentum in the Sylveon space. It's kind of a pastel card. I don't know. I like a lot about it. But again, another lesson, from peak until now, it's down 58.3%. And another card that you see, it did spend some time leveling out there after the peak, and it has started to kind of gain a little bit. So again, I'm just looking for patterns, I'm looking for lessons, and I'm starting to identify a few things. Now, Next card right here, the Lunala card. I love this. I said I wasn't going to do trainers, and I know that Lily's on here, but guess what? Lily's not named on here, so it doesn't matter. But again, another great card from Cosmic Eclipse. Another card with a sub 500 pop, only 494 in existence. Another one where pre-jump, this was a $200 card. Now, at the peak, we all know that the cards, you know, with trainers on there got a little bit crazy for a bit. At the peak, this one was at $500, and now it's retained a lot of that, right? It's still at $316. So from a pre-number of $200 to a post number of $316, that's a 58% gain. Again, nothing to shake a fist at. However, if you bought it at the $500 mark, you're down 37%. Not as aggressive as we've seen in the past, and you'll see on the graph, if you look on the far right side there, this card's been really, really choppy, working its way back down. You'll see that there have been some big sales all the way down, and now I think we're just starting to level out a little bit. And again, Cosmic Eclipse is an epic set, and this is some epic artwork in a really low population, so it'll be interesting to see how the price does. But again, the biggest thing is significant drops from that peak, and those are kind of the lessons and those are the correlations I'm trying to make when I'm looking at how these cards have performed versus the way the Sword and Shield era is performing currently. Next card right here. Another one that I'm absolutely in love with is this Mega Sableye and Tyranitar card. I love the artwork on this. I think it is awesome. And another card that has relatively low population, but on the higher side of all the ones that we've looked at. There's only 657 of these in a PSA 10, but PSA 10s of this were going for $180 before it went through that big pop, which, man, what a great opportunity. I missed it. I think that was a really cool space, but guess what? Post jump, it's only going for $200. It has not retained a lot of that post jump that we've seen in the past. We've seen some of those cards holding on to 60%, 60%, 80%, and then this one only has 11%, right? Because it peaked all the way up to $530. So it is pretty close, just about as close as you're going to get to flat before where it was before it hit that peak. So really interesting. But again, if you were on the FOMO train, if you jumped in on this when all of these other cards were getting really hot, you would have paid $530 for this in a PSA 10 holder at the peak price. And now it's come all the way down, like I said, almost to where it was before things started to get crazy. And if you look at the graph, it's actually still coming back down. So being able to buy a card of this awesomeness and this level of population, I don't know, it just depends. Are people going to care about Mega Sableye and Tyranitar 10, 15 years from now? That is yet to be determined, but I certainly love the art and I think it's a really cool card. The next one we're looking at right here, and the reason I did this one is because I've talked about the Moonbryon a lot. I've talked about how big the population is of that Moonbryon at 13,000. Well, guess what? The Lovebirds card right here is a far cry from that same population. We're talking about almost 1,400, which is nowhere near 13,000, but it is the highest pop card that we have seen on this entire list, and it is the big chase card from Sun and Moon, so I thought it was worth talking about, and it did perform fundamentally different. I've talked before in the past that those ultra premium cards, those ultra premium sets, like they have the ability to kind of withstand some market, you know, I don't know, some market turbulence, if you will. So before the thing got crazy, it was going for about $1,000. Still a really, really high Pokemon card, $1,000 for a PSA 10. But it peaked up at $3,000. Absolutely crazy. But it doesn't seem that crazy because you'll see it peaked at $3,000. It worked its way down. It flatlined for about a month, and it's been working its way up ever since. It's back up to $2,500. It's almost up to the same number it was during the peak, so that is absolutely crazy to see this card. So those of you who are out there thinking about what's going to go on with the Moonbryon, I'm not saying it'll follow the same pattern, but if the Moonbryon does go through a period where it drops from that $1,400, $1,500 range and it gets down, I don't know, into the $800, $900 range, something like that, we could see a similar pattern here. I'm not saying it's going to happen, not telling you to buy the card. I'm just saying it's really interesting to see the biggest and the baddest set from the Sun and Moon era, from the biggest and the baddest card from the Sun and Moon era, and to try and draw some comparisons. So still way up versus the number it was pre, barely down from where it was at its peak, and I thought this was a really cool takeaway, so obviously I had to share it with you. Now, I told you at the very end of this I was going to draw some comparisons and we we're just going to talk about things in general. And again, you have to take this with a grain of salt, as I said in the very beginning, okay? Most of these cards are sub 500 pop. We only had that Lovebirds card, which was close to 1,400, and then I think it was the Tyranitar and Mega Sableye card, which was at, you know, 650. Outside of that, all of these were sub 500, and you have to compare that to today's alt arts, where almost all of them are over 5,000. But again, remember, I say this all the time, demand is what dictates price, not supply. If you you are a firm believer that 10, 15 years from now, people are going to look at the Sun and Sword and Shield era, they're going to remember these cards, they're still going to want to have them in their collection, then it doesn't really matter what the pop is going to be, because future demand is what's going to drive prices. Now, one of the things that we said throughout this video is you noticed most of the losses from peak until where it is today was right around 50%. So when I think about the investing math on losing 50%, so if you have a $200 investment and you lose 50%, it drops to $100. Like, how much do you need? What kind of gain do you need to get back to $200? Well, most people, not most of you watching this channel because you're leveled up investors, like a lot of people would say, well, if I lost 50%, I have to gain 50% to get back to even. But sadly, that's not the case, because your jumping off point is different. 50% on top of $100, if it goes from 200 to 100, 50% loss. 50% gain on $100 is only 150 bucks, right? You're still nowhere near that $200 investment that you started with. You need another 100% gain. So instead of going up 50%, you need that to go up 100%. So when you think about what is needed when you have these huge losses, and again, I always say this, protect the downside. You don't want to lose. It is so hard to gain traction. I always say buy what will go up, not what has gone up. And when you look at this math and when you actually conceptualize that, then I hope it kind of reinforces the point and why I say, hey, I'm a little bit of a timid investor. I mean, obviously Pokemon isn't the safest thing in the world to invest in, but I do think when I'm buying things, I love sealed, I love graded cards, I love to buy things that I think will go up, not what have gone up. And when you think about the math around it, and when you see how some of these other cards have performed, hopefully that starts making a lot of sense. With all of that out of the way, listen, I know I'm having a great time in vacation. I hope that you guys really enjoyed this video. If you haven't hit the subscribe button yet, we do data dives like this all the time. So if you enjoy that type of content, go ahead and do it. We'd love to have you as a member. If you like what you saw, give us a thumbs up. And if you have questions or comments, drop them down below. I'll eventually get to them, but it'll be a minute. So you guys have an epic one. I appreciate you. I'll talk to you later. See you, everybody. Bye.